Welcome back to week 3. This is our final week of our Research Foundations unit. And so our final lecture that we're going to go over this week before you all have your scholarly summary presentations is MLA formatting. So some of this may be familiar to some of you if you've used this in high school or in any of your composition classes here at State Tech, but we're going to go ahead and review basic formatting and then basic citations as well, because you will be turning in a works cited page along with your speech for the source that you have used throughout this unit. So first, let's talk a little bit about what is MLA. So MLA is short for Modern Language Association, and basically it establishes standards of writing communication concerning specific formatting and page layout, applying stylistic technicalities to your papers within your academic career, how to correctly cite all different kinds of sources, and ultimately, MLA formatting is used when people are preparing their work for publication. It's a good uniform way to follow, so that way it's easy to read papers, speeches, and other assignments for other scholars within the field. So first, let's talk about just basic MLA formatting. So the first page of an MLA style paper will have no title page unless requested by your instructor, and I will go ahead and say for the purposes of this class, I will not ever request you all to have a title page. But some other MLA formatting tips, you will double space everything. So your entire paper will be double spaced. And as far as the heading, you, in the left-hand corner, you will always list your name, your instructor's name. So for my case, Miss K or Miss McCauley. The course, so that's going to be COM 111 dash your section that you're in. So for my online class, it's section 60, and the date. And like I said, that is always going to be in the upper left-hand corner. You'll also center the paper title. So you will use different titles throughout your courses here at State Tech for different topics, but the title will always be centered on the paper. You will use standard caps, no underlining, italics, quote marks, or bold typeface with that. And then you also will always need to create a header that numbers all pages consecutively in the upper right-hand corner. So here is an example of everything that we just discussed. As you can see on the left, that's where we have your header, name, instructor name, class name, and the date. Go ahead and also pay close attention to how that date is formatted. It's a little bit different than we're used to seeing, but you always have the day of the week first, the month spelled out, and then the year. And then if you look in the upper right-hand corner, you see that is the header that I was referring to. So it's always going to be your last name, and then page 1 will always be in your first page, and then depending on how long your assignment is, it will be in consecutive numerical order, so 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. As you can see too, the title is centered on this page, so the title for this paper is Analogy of Art, and go ahead and take note, double spaced. So there are certain settings within Word, Google Docs that you're able to double space your entire paper. If anyone has questions about that, just feel free to reach out, or if you do a simple Google search on how to double space, that will also let you know how to do that as well if you're not already familiar with that. So now let's talk about other aspects of just general MLA formatting. So you're always going to type that on white 8.5 by 11 paper. That's just the standard size paper, letter size paper that you guys are used to seeing. For the font, you always use 12-point font, even for your headers, your body of your text. There are times with MLA formatting that you can use a similar font, such as Arial or Calibri, but for the purposes of this class, go ahead and always use Times New Roman. Also, you'll always leave only one space after punctuation. So what that means is sometimes with certain formatting, you would, at the end of a sentence, you'd have a period, and then it would require two spaces after that. However, for MLA, it's basic, after your period, just one space, and then you begin your next sentence. And you always want to set all margins to 1 inch on all sides. So that includes the top, bottom, and the sides. Once again, I believe that is the default in Word and Google Docs, but there is a way to check that. If you have questions on that, let me know, or a simple Google search will show you how to set your margins. And then also you always want to indent the first line of a new paragraph 1/2 inch, which if you just use your tab button on your computers that you're using, that should automatically be the 1/2 inch. But let's go ahead and take a look. This is going to be another example that contains all the elements that we talked about on your first page, but then as you can see on the right here, 1 inch, 1 inch from the top and 1 inch from the left. Also, I want to note, so you can see where this header is placed, so that's only a 1/2 inch from the top. But that will automatically be a 1/2 inch from the top once you enter your header in the header section within Word or Google Docs. But when we refer to the 1 inch margins, that's 1 inch from the body of the text. And then here you can see over here on the left, that's about a 1/2 inch indent. That's pretty basic. You've all seen that before. One tab over. And you're going to want to indent a 1/2 inch every time you start a new paragraph. Here's some extra notes, extra things to be aware of when you're formatting. Make sure that there's no extra spaces between the upper left-hand information and title. So let's go back to this example. As you can see, it's still double spaced from this title and the bottom of your name header. Just pay attention to that when you are formatting your papers and your assignments in this class, because sometimes it's just natural to enter another space, but if you have your entire paper formatted to double spacing, then it should be okay, but just don't accidentally type in another extra space, and you'd be able to tell the difference on that. And then that same concept applies, no extra spaces between the title and the body of the paragraph, and no extra spaces between new paragraphs. So ultimately, just be aware and pay attention to your spacing throughout your assignments. It is part of the MLA format to have double space, but with no extra spacing in that. Also, I just want to talk a little bit about, we've been in this class for 2 weeks now. We've talked a lot about sources, citing sources was what our discussion was last week. I do like this visual guide from the Purdue OWL, which we will talk more about that resource as well. But if you're ever questioning, should I cite a source? Go ahead and take a look at this chart. And when you look at this, really what you're going to notice that the only time you wouldn't really need to cite is if it's your own information, data, or opinion. That's your idea that you came up with from scratch, not utilizing any other sources. As long as it's not published, which most of you probably haven't published anything yet, you're not going to need to cite it. So an example of that would be if you were providing background information on your specific expertise on a topic. So think about, for example, for this upcoming speech assignment, if you state which technical program you're in, you're not going to need to cite that information because that is your own personal information. The other time that you're not really going to need to cite is if the information is common knowledge. So do at least 5 credible sources have the information without a citation. So a really basic example of common knowledge would be if there's definitions of any terms that we use every day. I do want to note that if there is a specific term within your field that not many people know the definition of, that is something that you would need to cite. But for example, if you use the word university in a source, that is common knowledge. We all know what a university is. So that is something that you would not need to necessarily cite. Other than that, you're pretty much going to cite any information that you gain from any other source. We've talked about that. We don't want to commit unintentional plagiarism, but if you ever have questions, feel free to let me know or reference this guide. Now we are going to break down actually how to cite sources, what elements you need to contain in a citation, and so that's what we're going to go over the next few slides. But when deciding how to cite your source, you want to start by consulting the list of core elements, which is what we have here listed on the left, 1 through 9. These are always going to be the general pieces of information that MLA suggests, including in each works cited entry. And typically in your citation, elements are going to be listed in this order. Author's always going to be first, followed by the title of source, etc. We will get into detail later on in the class specifically about how that might vary depending on what kind of source you are citing. So now I'm going to go ahead and break down each of these core elements for you, so that way there's no confusion on what each core element is referring to. So first, an author. This one is pretty straightforward. We all know what an author of a source is. So you'll always begin the entry with the author's last name, followed by a comma, and the rest of the name as presented in the work. And then you'll always end this element with a period. So here's a few examples. Let's look at the first one. Last name Barron, comma, Naomi S, period. That's how that's always going to look. Now, if there's not a middle initial on the source, then you don't need to include it, like the example below where it just has Jacobs, comma, first name, period. And we'll discuss a little bit too with multiple authors, but for now let's just keep it simple and straightforward. So next you are going to look at the title of the source. That should always follow the author's name, and depending upon the type of source, it should be listed in italics or quotation marks. So if you are citing a book or a website, the title of the source should be in italics, as you can see from our examples up on this PowerPoint. Last name, comma, first name, period, the title, so many books, in italics, followed by a period. However, if you're using periodicals, which are those journal articles that we've been talking about a lot, a magazine, a newspaper article, and then things like television episodes and songs, those should be cited with quotation marks. So once again, we have an example here. Beyonce, period, Pretty Hurts. That's the name of a song. It's in quotation marks. Take note though, there is still a period following the title of the source within the quotation mark. So now let's talk about title of container. And so this is something that's new with the 8th edition of the MLA that has recently come out. So containers are the larger holes in which the source is located. So for example, if you want to cite a poem that is listed in a collection of poems, the individual poem is the source, but the larger collection is the container. The title of the container is usually italicized and followed by a comma, since the information that follows next describes the container. So let's go ahead and take a look at some examples, because I know this term is new for you. It's new for me. So let's take a look at this first one. So we can identify the author as Bazin, Patrick. Title of the source would be Toward Meta Reading, and then the container is going to be the future of the book, etc., etc. And then let's see here. The next example is similar. Let's look at the third one on the screen. So under the gun, that's going to be the title of the Pretty Little Liars episode. But as you can see, Pretty Little Liars is the container. And then you have information, season 4, episode 6, etc., etc. Oftentimes, especially if you're using a scholarly journal article, you might not necessarily need to have title of the container. Instead, that's going to be the title of the journal, which is technically the container because that is where that single piece of work is published in the larger format. So following the title of container, there are times where you're going to have other contributors to your sources outside of just the authors who should be credited. This is typically going to be editors, illustrators, translators, etc. If their contributions are relevant to your research, or if it's necessary to identify the source, include the names in your documentation. So here we have some examples. For example, this first one, the original author is Chartier, Roger, period, and then we have the title of the container. This was a source that was translated, so therefore, since you're reading the translated version, it's important to note the other contributors. Translated by Lydia G. Cochran. Go ahead and take a look at some of those other sources. I will say a lot of the times this is going to be things like novels. You might not necessarily use these types of sources with other contributors often in this class. It's still important to note though for MLA. Now we're going to take a look at version. So if a source is listed as an edition or version of a work, include it in your citation. So here's an example. Our first one, we are citing the Bible. As you may know, there are lots of different versions of the Bible, so this is a great example of when you would want to include an edition. So the title of the book is the Bible, and the version is going to be that King James Version, followed by the publisher and the year. Next, let's talk about number. So if a source is part of a numbered sequence, such as a multi-volume book or a journal with both volume and issues numbers, those numbers must be listed in your citation. So like I said, we've been using a lot of scholarly journal articles in here, and as you have noticed, as we've discussed, they typically contain a volume number and an issue number within that journal. So this is going to be a great example of that. So let's take a look at this first example. This is the MLA citation that you all are going to see the most with the work in this class, and actually what you're going to follow when you cite your scholarly article for that final assignment. So as you can see here, we have last name, comma, first name of the author. The title of the article is Redefining Reading, the Impact of Digital Communication Media. That PMLA in italics is the journal that it was published in, or the container. And here's where you see it was published in volume 128, issue 1, followed by the date and the page numbers. So this first example right here on this slide is the citations that you are going to be utilizing for your assignment due on Friday. So this is a great example to follow when you are working to cite your source. Next, let's talk about publisher. So the publisher is who produces or distributes the source to the public. So if there is more than one publisher and they are all relevant to your research, list them in your citation separated by a /. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example. This first one, author, title of the article, and then we have the container here, where it was published, in a URL. I will go ahead and say most of the time you are not going to have sources with multiple publishers. That's kind of rare to see, but I still wanted to go over that in case you do run into that. Next, let's talk about publication date. So the same source may have been published on more than one date, such as an online version of original source, or when the source has more than one date, go ahead and use the date that is most relevant to your use of it. So the best example of this is your class textbook. So if you were to look at the title page within that textbook, you would see copyrighted with, I think it's, for your textbook, it's 3 dates. And you're going to want to use the date where it was most recently copyrighted. So here's some examples. Once again, this isn't necessarily going to show the original source where it showed you how many dates was associated with it, but as you can see within this example, there's only one date used for each citation. So always use the date that is most relevant to your use of it. Location. So you will need to be as specific as possible in identifying a work's location. So that can mean a variety of things. Usually it's going to refer to the page numbers within your academic journal articles that we've been discussing. And so as you can see, this goes last here. It was pages 74 to 94, but it was published in the thing around your neck. You will also need to pay close attention to page numbers. For example, if you're just specifically citing a paragraph out of a novel, which is the example of this first citation here. So go ahead and keep that in mind. And then the second example we have, so it was published originally in the Atlantic. However, because we included the URL, that is showing us where we accessed the source. So we know just from this source containing a URL that the location of where we read the source was online because there's that URL. Now we're going to go over some optional elements. I mostly just want to go over this so that you all know if you see these in citations but don't see them in other ones, it's because these are optional. And so with the 8th edition of MLA, it's designed to be as streamlined and straightforward as possible. And so the author should include any information that helps readers easily identify the source without including unnecessary information that may be distracting. And so that's why these are considered optional. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now, there's no straightforward answer on these, whether or not you should include them or not. It is just up to you if you think it's important. And we're also going to discuss Purdue out with the citation generator. So I know this is really overwhelming right now, but I have a resource that is going to help you know what to include and what to not. But sometimes you might want to include the date of an original publication instead of the date, or with the date also from when you access it. So this is typically going to apply to historical documents that are well known. So for example, this Immigration to America by Benjamin Franklin, originally published in 1782, but the source that this person was citing was an edited version published in 1992. But since it is a well-known source, it was important to include that original date. Also, sometimes you might want to include city of publication. So, once again, this second example, an older source from 1875. And the reason why they included the city of publication, London, right here, is because they were citing a translated version. Like I said, for the purposes of this class, since this isn't a literature class, you likely won't be running into these elements within your citations, but I wanted to go over them so that you're just aware if you see them. Sometimes you'll want to include original URLs to websites, just depending on if there is a URL available for a web page. That is an easy way for us to know where you access that, the location of your source. Let's talk about DOIs, digital object identifiers. So You're going to see this a lot with academic journal articles that you all have been reading. You might have noticed when you go on the database and you click to view the citation, it has this DOI number. This is specific to the database. You can actually search databases using DOI numbers and it will pull up the article that you're referencing. So sometimes if there is a DOI, you will include that, but it is not necessarily needed every single time. And lastly, date of access. So typically I do see date of access included in MLA format, and so as you can see with this one, this Pretty Little Liars episode, the person, when they cite this source, they watched this episode on the 23rd of July of 2013. Like I said, I know this isn't very straightforward, but it is important to know, just even when you're looking at a citation, what certain elements are referring to. So that's why I wanted to discuss that. And then lastly, let's talk about what a works cited page looks like in MLA formatting. So remember, your entire work is going to be double spaced. So when you do copy your reference for your source that you're using for your speech on Friday, this is what I want it to look like as far as formatting. Double spaced. The first line, which is going to be the last name of the author, is going to have a hanging indent with the rest of the information of the citation tabbed over a ½ inch to the right. This is a good example of if you had more than one, but take note of this because this is what it should look like when you submit your citation on Friday to me. So now that we've gone over that information, I want to show you guys a resource for you that you need to use so that this is a lot easier for you. So let me pull this up here real quick. So I have this link to this Purdue OWL on your resources page within Canvas so that you can access it directly. But the Purdue Online Writing Lab through Purdue University has a system, they refer to it as the OWL, Purdue OWL specifically right here. This has everything you could need to know about MLA Overview and Workshop. It has why use MLA, who should use MLA. It also has this MLA formatting and style guide. So it will go over in text citations, how to cite a book, how to cite a periodical. So let's just open that. It breaks it down. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time in this class to necessarily go over every single way to cite every single source, and that's why I want to give you guys this resource. Because if you are ever, for example, citing an article in a magazine, look right here. This is what the elements that you're going to need in the order that you're going to need them, with even whether you need italics or quotations and what punctuation you need within that. Here's electronic sources. Here's the following format. It breaks it down really, really well. So you guys, I cannot stress this enough, need to check this out. Use it in this class, use it in other classes. Whenever you're using or whenever you're citing a source, this will break it down. Also, there is an MLA sample paper in here for you all, if it loads. This breaks down even further how to do your headers right here, up right in the top right, how to center your title, what elements you should include for your information on the left-hand side, and it even breaks down headers. For this class, you're not going to be writing essays, but I know that you will have to do that in other classes, so that's why I wanted to show you this resource in case you didn't have this in your other classes. But now let's go back to the most important aspect of this resource for you. Right here. This is a citation generator. Let me repeat, citation generator. This will generate your citations. All you have to do is provide the source. So for example, let's say we were looking at this website and we wanted to cite information from here. This is what you're going to do. You're going to copy this URL. Make sure that you have website selected because we are citing a website, but take note, you can also do this with a book and a journal article. So website, copy and paste this URL, click cite, and look. Now you'll want to check to make sure that this is the correct source, but 9 times out of 10 it's going to be East New York's Empire State Dairy could become a landmark Tuesday. That title matches with our source. Author. Oops. Go ahead and check that. Author matches. So we know that this is what we need. So let's click Cite. Now, it's going to automatically fill in things for you. Article title, URL, website title, date access, date published. However, sometimes there's going to be times where, this is just a algorithm where it might miss something. So it's going to tell you, though, exactly what you'll need to identify within the source to complete your citation. So here we know we're going to need our publisher, our sponsor. So if you click continue, this is where it's going to allow you to enter any missing information. Now, I will say this is a great resource, but you will need to check sometimes the formatting within this because it is a machine, so it's not perfect. As we noticed, New York needs to be capitalized, and we don't need to have Tuesday all caps. So let's go ahead and fix that. Double check. Kate Corcoran is the author, so that's good. Website title, Brownstoner. Here's the URL, and let's double check this electronically published just to make sure. December 4th, 2017. That checks out. Now, here's where it's asking you to enter the publisher and sponsor. You are always going to find publishers on websites at the bottom. Now, this one is a little hard to find because it keeps scrolling, but what I can do is go to the home page of this website, and let me show you where this is at. The publisher for websites, sorry about that, are often going to be in the bottom footer. So, you see where this copyright is? Good indication of who the publisher is. Brownstoner LLC is our publisher. So let's go ahead, type that in. Now, we're going to go ahead and complete this citation. So I will say sometimes when because there is an option to pay this for this site and you won't have to watch ads, but you can always get free citations if you just watch a short ad. So I apologize. I'm going to mute that. It's typically a short advertisement. It is kind of annoying. You have to sit through it. But after we watch these ads, it'll show you your citation. Okay. So, as you can see, here is the citation we just worked on. Once again, let's double check it. See, now this is capitalized. We don't necessarily want that capitalized, so let's edit it. I missed that on the first review. Okay, update citation. And this is in perfect format, as you can see. It has author, title of the article, in italics where it was published, the date, and the URL. And then you know what you can do? You can literally copy this citation, and then it's copied to your clipboard and you will be able to copy and paste it. Let's just show you here. Here it is. Now, oftentimes you will need to indent this over, tab over, but it copies it for you. So please use this resource. Let me know if you all have any questions. Like I said, the resource is in your resources tab.